The Torah reading this week, Toldot, moves on to the next generation of the Jewish people. It moves on from Abraham and Sarah, and it moves on to focus on the lives and the household of his son Yitzchak and Yitzchak's wife Rivka. So we're dealing with generation 2 of the founding families of the Jewish people, which is deemed to be the 3 generations of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and his wives, which included Leah and Rachel. The title of this class is The Home Rebekah Built. And we know finding her as a wife for Yitzchak was the main subject in last week's Torah reading. And we discussed it in depth in terms of what personal qualities she brought to the table. And what I would like to do tonight is to look through the Parsha with an unusual perspective, the perspective of looking inside the household in a way from Rebekah's eyes. You know, in the past, we've always been very intrigued with the intrigue itself of who gets the blessings and the competition between Jacob and his twin brother Esau for the affection of the parents and for the acquiring of the blessings, which is the main drama. But I wanted to take a moment to look at it more from the perspective of Rivka herself, of Rebekah, the second matriarch of the Jewish people. And I want to begin just by quoting a sentence from chapter 14, sentence 1 in Mishlei in Proverbs. And it's a famous sentence, and it goes as follows. It says, my glasses on here. It says, Chachmot noshim bonsa beta. The wise amongst women, they build their households. So because we focused last week on the character and that Rebekah showed at the well, which qualified her to become the wife of Yitzchak, and because I wanted to continue that theme, and I wanted to really look at the events of this week's Parsha from the perspective of this is Rebekah's home, this is Rivka's home. She was the matriarch of the home. It was the home that she forged and built, being entrusted with the legacy of Abraham and Sarah. And we're going to see how the important role that she plays. And I want to substantiate this through 2 references before we look at the sentences in the Parsha itself. We make many changes in the prayer service on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. One of the changes, we have a different structure to the prayers. We have sections that are only said once a year, but in one particular subtle way, in a way where we many of us may know the tune for Shochein Ad Moram V'Kadosh Shemo. We actually changed the phrases, and I'm going to hold up this art scroll Machzor for a second and point it out to you. And if you have one at home, it's on page 262 in the art scroll Machzor. But we actually reformulate these words so that the name Yitzchak and the name Rivka bold out from the words themselves. And Rav Schwab, in an important lecture, points out the fact that when we think of Hayom Horat Olam, when we celebrate the high holidays, and we say it's the launching of the world, the word we use is Hayom Horat Olam. This is the moment when the world was conceived. And we know that conception is a feminine matter. And therefore, Rav Schwab says, you could properly see how the prayers themselves are altered to highlight the important leadership and role, an important decisive role women have played in the history of the Jewish people. And that's going to be the prism we are going to use in this class. And with that in mind, if you have an art scroll Chumash in front of you, you can follow along. I'll index all the page numbers that we're going to reference, but hopefully I'll read it clearly enough so that we can follow along with the narrative that's taking place here. Let's have and rather than me giving you an overview, let's go through and I'll highlight some of the sentences. This Torah reading begins where last week's had finished off, picks up where last week's had finished off, sorry. That it's talking about the household that Yitzchak, the son of Abraham, forges. And it says he reached the age of 40. He was married to his wife, Rivka. She became pregnant. And on page 124, 125, very famously, the Torah says the children agitated within her. And she sought divine understanding. How could it be that one father and one mother can bring into the world simultaneously in the form of twins, two antagonists that in every way, shape, and form seem to represent polar opposites of one another? And indeed, that's the message she receives when she inquires of the messengers of God, and she doesn't go for various reasons we're not going to discuss tonight to her husband, but she seeks out the insight, and she's told, in fact, there's two different nations within you. So this pregnancy is momentous, and it's going to be predicting of the history of the world, because two completely estranged nations and groups of people are simultaneously coming into being within her. And of course, that breeds a sense of conflict and a sense of contrast. The twins are born, and we'll fast forward 15 years until a very special day takes place. If you look at page 126, 127, this is chapter 25, sentence 27 in the narrative. It says the lads grew up, and Esav, the firstborn of the twins, became one who knows hunting, a man of the field. But Jacob was a wholesome man abiding in tents. Isaac loved Esau, for game was in his mouth, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So these two children who grew up side by side under the tutelage of the same mother and father of Isaac and Rebekah, and who, although physically they didn't resemble each other, and although they struggled, so to speak, in the womb itself from the moment of conception forward, they grew up in parallel to each other. But at a certain point, at this moment, their paths diverged, and each one followed their inner being and their inner calling, and they came out in two different directions. And let's just look at this for a second. Esau went out to subdue the world, and that's what it means to be a hunter, to bend the resources of the world to my will, and to become an acquirer, and to become a dominant force in the world. Jacob, it's contrasted, was a person who dwelt in tents. Now that echoes something that goes all the way back to the time of Noah coming out of the ark, where God alludes to tents of shame. And we know from Abraham in the past, the tent represents beneficence, kindness to strangers, bringing people into your tent. It represents a home that is rooted in values, and those values are very specific in terms of elevating mankind. So we see from these descriptions, one is going out and, if you wanted to use very gross terms, following the way of the world in terms of conquering the world and subduing it. And the other is living a quieter, more contained existence with goals of providing light and providing uplift and sharing kindness on the world. And these are opposite poles. And this day proves when they turn 15 becomes a fateful day. And the Torah goes on and says, Jacob simmered or stew. And we have right away, all the commentaries mention that, what are we describing here? Jacob wasn't the chef for the family. He was living in tents. He was studying Torah. He was enriching himself with wisdom, which was the legacy of his father Isaac and the legacy of his father Abraham. But he was cooking stew. It must be because at this moment someone was mourning. So by tradition, this is the day that Abraham passed away. So these two 15-year-old boys experienced a loss in the family. So what has until now been a 3-generational unit of Abraham, the patriarch, Sarah did pass away many years before, Isaac, the father, and Rebekah, the mother, and these two twin boys. Now that's broken because Abraham passes away and Isaac is sitting in mourning for his father, and Jacob is undertaking the role of the firstborn in providing for the family at this moment of sorrow and loss and cooking the traditional meal. What happens next is more momentous. Esau comes in from the field, meaning the very field we were describing before, where he's a hunter, and he demands to eat this food. Sentence 30, sentence 29, sentence 30, pour into me now some of this very rich stuff, for I am exhausted. Jacob says, I'll do that in exchange for your birthright. I'm acting at this moment as though I'm the firstborn. I'm undertaking the leadership role in the family, something that you have showing no interest in. Sell it to me. And Esau said, look, I am going to die. So of what use to me is the birthright? Jacob says, swear to me this day, page 129. Esau swears to him, sells him the birthright in exchange for this food. And Jacob gives Esau bread and lentil stew. And Esau ate and drank and got up and left. Thus, Esau spurned the birthright. There's a lot of dynamics going on in here. What does it mean when Esau says, what good is the birthright? I'm about to die. So Rashi and many others take the idea that these two 15-year-olds understood that inheriting the legacy of Abraham, their grandfather, and Isaac, their father, was not a picnic. It involved devotion to a cause. It involved self-sacrifice. And we today, these thousands of years later, we can look back and say it involved immense moments of tragedy. It involved immense moments of spiritual attainment and accomplishment. But it would be clear that from the eyes of the quote unquote rest of the world, most people would say, this is not a history that I want to buy into. So Esau, in the end, when he despises the birthright, but he's made a decision here. His decision was, you want to take on this legacy, you want to be a leader, you want to be a canary in the mine, so to speak, leading the pathway toward righteousness and goodness and kindness and elevating mankind with all of the severe consequences that such efforts bring upon you. It's yours. That's not what I'm in for, and I turn my back on it. Now, the Torah goes on to discuss the lives of Isaac himself digging wells, and we're going to pass that by, and we're going to turn to chapter 27 on page 134, 135, and we're going to pick up the narrative again at a much later time, and I'm not exactly sure how many years later, but it's about 45 years later. So both of these 15-year-olds have certainly matured. And it came to pass, when Isaac had become old, and his eyes dimmed from seeing, that he summoned Esau, his older son, and said to him, my son, see now I have aged. I know that the day of my death is near. Bring me food that I can bless you, and I can bestow upon you the blessings, the traditional blessings of the Jewish people. Rebekah hears this, and we will probably all remember the details, how she creates a situation to unmask or open the eyes of her blind husband to see who was truly deserving. But I want to point out something which is really overlooked often in the narrative, and I think this is the flashpoint of tonight's class. For 45 years, or really for 60 years or more, a little bit more, this family has remained intact. This is not the family of Abraham and Sarah sending Ishmael away because he's a bad influence. This is a unit of a family of a father and a mother and two vastly different children, and they're living together as one household all the way through these years. And again, to reach back to Mishlei and Proverbs, as we mentioned in the beginning, that's Rivka's achievement. Rivka somehow has managed with her wisdom, as it says in Proverbs, to construct a family where there's room for each of these people to grow and to develop. And there's room for the two boys, each in their own way, to benefit from the influence, the positive influence that their father and their mother can bestow upon them. How do we know this for sure? Because in the process of taking the blessings, Rivka has access to the finest clothing that Esav owns. And that's what she takes out, and that's what she has her son Jacob wear in order to convince their blind father that he, in fact, is deserving of the blessings. And Rashi comments right away, what's his clothing doing by his mother? He's already a married man. He already has children of his own. Jacob did not, but he did. And he says because he trusted his mother. He kept his finest things with her because she was his confidant. She was his mother. He saw her in that regard, even though there is such a huge contrast between his daily life and his daily pursuits. Rivka, to her credit, held together a family, this unitary family in one place, in one way, in spite of their differences. And she did that because that's what a mother does. And that's what her investment properly was. And that's where her extreme wisdom and her sterling character came together, that she was able to manage it. But now, at this moment, where Isaac decides to bestow the blessings on one of these two boys, Rivka realizes that this is a decision point for her. She can't sit back and let events take their course, because if she were to do so, it's clear to her that the entire legacy of Abraham and Sarah would be threatened. It would be destroyed. If placed in the hands of an Esau, this legacy of uplift and serving God and enlightening the world and being a light unto the nations and showing people that spirituality trumps world dominion and domination, something that still is an issue which the Jewish people in many ways represent clearly to the world. That's why the world always sees us as being so vulnerable. The world always sees us as being the people that if they need a scapegoat, we're it, because we always seem to be in such a vulnerable position. And that's part of God's plan for the world. We're not the triumphant nation that conquers other nations. We are the rose sitting amongst the thorns. And when the wind blows, we're the ones who tend to get torn and tattered. And yet somehow we prevail. Rebecca steps up. Rebecca comes up with this plan to see to it that the blessings go to Jacob. And she succeeds. But where does that leave her? Well, immediately after the blessings are done, she understands, and she understands this through, Rashi says, her Ruach HaKodesh. If you look at chapter 28, at the end here. I'm sorry, right after the blessings are given. It's not chapter 28. Chapter 27, sentence 41. I'm sorry, it's on page 141. Now Esau harbored hatred towards Jacob because of the blessings with his father had blessed him. And Esau thought, may the days of mourning of my father draw near, then I will kill my brother Jacob. Sentence 42. When Rebekah was told of the words of her older son Esau, she sent and summoned Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, behold, it's time for you to hit the road. You need to go back to where I came from. You need to find a wife there for yourself. You need to establish your own family. And no longer can our intact family remain intact. So what do we see here? We're used to talking about the 10 trials that Abraham faced. Look at the trial and the challenge to the achievement, the very household that Rebecca has built with her own 2 hands over the past 60 plus years. She's ready to throw all that away in order to protect and to preserve the legacy of Abraham and ultimately the legacy of her own husband, Isaac, and see to it that Jacob receives the blessings, even at great threat and great risk, and then to send him out in the world, we could say, to meet his destiny. And I think this becomes more clear if we just look at the analysis of the blessings themselves. And we're going to do that now. The blessings themselves, the blessing that was stolen, taken by Jacob. Let's look at the page, chapter 27, sentence 27. It's on page 138, 139. Isaac draws Jacob close and kisses him. He smells the fragrance of his garments and blessed him. And he said to himself, the fragrance of my son is like the fragrance of a field which Hashem has blessed. So what sets up this blessing is a clear realization on the part of Isaac that I may be confused. This person claims to be Esau. He speaks like Jacob. There's certainly reasons for me simply to hold back and wait and see what happens. But through this kiss and through this association, Isaac himself becomes absolutely convinced that this person in front of me is in fact deserving of the blessing, which is exactly what Rebecca wanted to accomplish. And the blessing is, and may God give you of the dew of the heavens and the fatness of the earth, sentence 28, an abundant grain and wine. Peoples will serve you, regimes will be humbled before you. You will be a leader amongst all the other nations. So what is he setting up here? See, what Isaac is out to accomplish is he's out to accomplish a situation where these 2 diametrically different brothers can somehow forge a relationship where one protects and helps the other. So in Isaac's mind, he knows he's got the right person in front of him, but his goal is, if you have a withdrawn, quiet, scholarly brother in Jacob, whose tendency is not to be out there in the world, but whose tendency is to be a quieter person, just like I have been throughout my life. I know that person needs a protector, and I want you, Esau, my older son, to become his protector. Now, Rebecca would endorse that plan in a second, except she understands that the nature of Esau is that once he begins taking dominion and once he begins conquering in the world, he's going to lose sight of any responsibility to his poor, frail little brother. And instead, he's going to become totally self-serving, and he's only going to be out for himself. So she foils this plan. And what she does is she places blessings onto the head of Jacob, which is, you too will find the wherewithal to at least hold your own in the world without having your large, hairy leadership brother defend you. And that's the blessing that gets orchestrated and given to Jacob. Now let's look at the blessing that is ultimately given to Esau. When he complains and he cries before his father, and on page 141, chapter 27, sentence 37, Isaac answers and says, behold, a Lord, I have made him over you. Do you have at least one blessing for me? So here's what Isaac answers in sentence 39. Of the fatness of the earth shall be your dwelling, and of the dew of the heavens from above. By your sword you shall live. So he's giving him a blessing that you, separate from your brother, should have independent success and prosperity, not for the purpose of protecting your brother or elevating his message to the world, because that's not going to be sustained. He understands already that Rebecca's viewpoint is right. So you'll live by the sword. You'll be an independent person. But then he adds a twist at the end, sentence 40. Your brother you shall serve. In other words, don't feel that your goal is to take charge and dominion over this brother. You can conquer the world, but not him. Yet it shall be that when you are aggrieved, you may cast off his yoke upon your neck. The commentary who explains this most directly is the Malbim, a recent commentary from the 19th century. And he says like this, what does it mean? What right does Esau have to feel aggrieved? And he explains as follows. The ultimate decision here, and I'm really construing it as a joint decision in the end between Isaac and Rebekah, is that ideally, if there would only be a way for these two brothers to remain as one household, where the stronger defending from the outside world and preserving the integrity and goodness and innocence of the other, that would be a great situation. But that's not going to happen. The nature of the larger brother doesn't allow for that. So instead, let's give the wherewithal to Jacob to find his way in the world where he can hold his own. Let's give Esau the possibility of going out as a separate entity and enjoying the life that he's forged for himself of hunting and conquering and dominating. But do it separate from your brother Jacob so his legacy, his spiritual voice could remain in the world. However, to the extent that Jacob, that we, the Jewish people, don't maintain our posture in the world as being representatives of God's ideals and viewpoint and being a light unto the nations, if we don't do that, then the whole rationale for giving us the blessings is dissipated. We don't deserve it. In that sense, Esau is aggrieved and he has reason to claim against us. And therefore, when that happens, Esau has an opening to persecute the Jewish people, because after all, he was separated from us so that we could do our job fully in history and teach God's message to the world and represent God's message to the world and be role models to the world. But if we don't do that, then he really does have a grievance. He really was the firstborn. And if we're not doing our job, we can't hold it against him that he wasn't ready to do his job. So where does that leave us? And chapter 28 ends off this week's Torah reading. We really have come full circle. What happens? Chapter 28, sentence 1, page 143. So Isaac summoned Jacob and blessed him. He instructed him and said to him, do not take a wife from the Canaanite women. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take a wife from there from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. And Hashem will bless you and make you fruitful and numerous. So it's not exactly analogous to last week's Torah reading, because Isaac had the privilege of remaining at home while Abraham's servant went and made this trip and found him his Rebekah and brought that Rebekah back to the home and joined him in the land of Canaan and ultimately what's the land of Israel. Jacob doesn't have that luxury. His life has been too fraught already. There's too much conflict within the home. It's too dangerous for him to remain in proximity within that home. So what does Jacob have to do? Jacob has to do exactly what we, the Jewish people, have been doing for the last 2,000 years. He has to leave. He has to go out into the world, into an antagonistic world. He has to maintain his ideals and his values. He has to be clear to find that partner in life. In his case, it'll be partners in life who have the same integrity and purity and good character as his mother, Rebekah, showed when she was found by the well in this very same place. So he's going to have to go there. He's going to have to meet the challenge of living with that family there, which is antagonistic. On his way home, what's he going to have to do? He's going to have to struggle with an angel and show, I can hold my own against any force on earth that could be arrayed against me, because I'm going to remain true to this mission of carrying forward the legacy of Abraham and my father Yitzhak. And that's where, shockingly at the end, at the very end of this parsha, so Isaac sent away Jacob, sentence 5, chapter 28. And he went toward Padan Aram to Laban, the son of Bethuel the Aramean, brother Rebekah, mother of Jacob and Esau. After all is said and done, Rivka, this person who we met at the well, has stood this test where she's still the mother of each of her children. She still has a relationship to them. She still has a connection to them. She still has an influence over them in a good way. One son is going to end up making his way in the world and coming back with the groundwork for the nation of Israel. And they're going to settle in the land. They're going to end up going down to Egypt and being enslaved. They're going to come back to the land. They're going to build the first temple. They're going to build the second temple. And then ultimately, they're going to go through 2,000 plus years of exile, just as Jacob is about to embark upon right now. That's the setup here. And what do we take away from this? This is how Jacob is prepared to meet his destiny. This is the background that enables us to carry forward as the Jewish people and to prevail and to hold our own and to remind us that we have a job to fulfill in the world. That job is to carry forward this legacy. And yes, we fall short. And yes, that makes us vulnerable to suffer grievances in a very antagonistic world. But we too can prevail. And if we keep reinforcing the message and we keep returning to it, then ultimately the Jewish people do triumph through history. And then what do we see at the end? What is this Rosh Hashanah davening prayers that we talked about at the beginning? Ultimately, the goal is that with this moral leadership, the entire world will reunite. Households will become reattached with each other. These antagonisms will dissipate and will become a world that acknowledges God universally and upholds the purpose which God set out to be fulfilled by mankind when the world was created. And hence we have by looking at Rebekah's house and her unique ability to navigate, to see to it that values prevail, and at the same time doing everything humanly possible to hold her household together, and then ultimately being willing to live with the consequences of a house divided for the purpose of maintaining the spiritual legacy, which she sees herself as the matriarch of preserving through the world. Happy to answer any questions. Not want to wish everybody a great week, being thankful and feeling Thanksgiving and feeling a sense of gratitude is essential. It's essential to happiness. It's essential to finding the energy and the will to go on. And please God, it should be a great rest of the week and a beautiful, beautiful Shabbos together. As we read this parsha, we can remember these ideas. Thank you very, very much. Have a great week.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.